Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Morgan Library and Museum. I'm Lyndon Chubin. I'm the Director of Education, and we are delighted to be collaborating again with Penn on the World Voices Festival and host this this distinguished group of writers and thinkers in a program called Russia in Two Acts. While you are at the Morgan, I hope that you will take some time to visit our exhibitions, which include the portraits of William Shakespeare and also the diary, the latter which features diaries ranging from Charlotte Bronte to Bob Dylan, and that's in our second floor gallery. So do make sure you have a green button for walking around the Morgan, and if you don't have one, that's available at the admissions desk. Just to let you know, we present a wide range of films and lectures and concerts, family programs, and literary programs. And I want to let you know that on May 10th, the author Jonathan Franzen, who I believe is a participant in the Penn Festival, and the director, screenwriter Paul Schrader will be here in conversation with Antonio Monda. So do pick up our calendar, check out our website, and if you're not already members of the Morgan, I encourage you to support our activities throughout the year. I would like to ask that you please silence your cell phones, and there is no photography that is permitted at today's program. And also want to remind you that we are selling some books in the auditorium lobby. So please do look at those books, and all of the speakers will be available in our education center after the program. So please exit from the rear of the house and proceed to the lobby and not towards the stage, and enjoy the program. Thanks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is László Jakabowicz. I'm the director of the Penn World Voices Festival. This is the beginning of our finale of a week-long series of events marking the 7th annual Penn World Voices Festival. Nothing can be more invigorating and reassuring than having a coda on a high note. This is some kind of a dream project, a dream event for us, with a substantial content, an important cause, and amazing collaborators who were all the way throughout the planning procedure were receptive to the idea. Together with the Morgan Library, Fedor Foundation, and New York Review of Books, we are proudly present Russia in Two Acts. And on this note, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the editor giant of New York Review of Books, Bob Silver. Bob.
Well, thank you all for coming. I myself am excited to have such a group here with us on this final day. And it is the last day of a remarkable festival. There will be recordings of it. There'll be transcripts of it. They can be found online at penn.org. Now, I must say that it wouldn't have been possible, the whole thing, and today as well, if we hadn't had the support of Morgan Chase, of Penn, and the Fritt Ord Foundation in Norway, in Oslo, a remarkable foundation. The words Fritt Ord are not arcane, they mean free word. And that is what the foundation sponsors in different parts of the world. Now, we have a rather remarkable and unusual event in that it is built around, it will start with a talk. And the talk will be by Garry Kasparov, who is sitting right in the middle. He will talk with slides. He will talk for less than a half hour, and on stage, seated with notepads, are the rest of our panel. After he finishes, I ask you to remain seated while people rearrange their thoughts, having heard Garry. And then we have our moderator, Christian Caryl, who's sitting right here, who will guide the discussion. Now, first, I should say something about Garry, who is someone of a stature and a combination of qualities which is quite rare, if not unique, in the history of Russian and thought. He was, after all, the chess champion of the world, and he's one of the great chess players who've ever lived. He's a great virtuoso. But he became chairman of the United Civil Front, the Russian pro-democracy group, which is opposing the administration of Vladimir Putin. It was true that he had once become the youngest player ever to win the World Chess Championship. He remained a top-ranked player for 20 years. And he also played against, as we all know, Garry, Deep Blue, the famous IBM machine. And he went on to develop and promote an entire vision of a different Russia. So he will speak. And after him, we will have Christian. Now, Christian Caryl, at the moment, is chief editor of Radio Free Europe. He's a contributing editor of Foreign Policy. He's a senior fellow at the Center for International Studies at MIT. He's written widely. When I say widely, there's something very special about the width, because on the one hand, he's a most acute commentator on Russia, on Korea, on China, on developments in the world. On the other hand, he's written brilliantly on such complex writers as Michael Walzer or John le Carré. He's a first-rate literary critic. Now, after he takes over, we will have the rest of our panel, and here they are. There's Jamey Gambrell. She's a writer on art and culture. Her translations consist of, just to take one example, Marina Svistaya, her Moscow diaries. She lived in Moscow for years. She worked for organizations there. She's translated Tatiana Tolstoya, just among one of a number of important works. And then we have, sitting at the end, Vladmir Sorokin. He's a leading Russian novelist, playwright. He's written many books. Well over 10 novels, plays, dozens of short stories, and translated into over 20 languages, English, French, German, Italian, and I think he's become famous for a combination of different modes and styles that, drawn from contemporary literature in the past, that in his own work explode into very original forms. He's received a lot of awards, the Booker Prize, the People's Booker Prize, and he was presented with the award of André Bailly for outstanding contributions to Russian literature. Now, sitting right here is Fedor Svarovskiy. He's a Russian, a journalist, a poet, writer. His first novel, Everyone Wants to Be a Robot. It received the Moskovitsky Prize. It was shortlisted for the André Bailly Prize. He has a poetry collection, Time Travelers. Poetry has been translated all over the world, whether Danish, English, Bulgarian, Ukrainian. And we have with us also, finally, Laura Esther Wolfson, who she's on hand to interpret for Sorokin and for anyone else who says they'd like a translator. And now I'm turning this program over to Garry Kasparov.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Bob, for the introduction. And thank you for New York Review of Books for inviting me for this event. And also thanks for PEN International, an admirable organization. We all know it's not just about literature, but also about defending and promoting the power of the written word and those who write. Just one more extra piece of information about myself, because it's very often overlooked in any introduction. And I think it's important to share here in America. As few people probably know that I was born and raised in the Deep South, right next to Georgia. This is, of course, the Deep South of the USSR, city Baku, Azerbaijan, and that's exactly right next to Georgia. So that's my native town. And I'm also very happy to be here today in this refreshing atmosphere of Morgan Library, because after I quit chess, I've been doing lectures, and mostly it's for corporations. And of course, many of them establish their businesses in Russia, and they're getting very cautious, if not to say worse, about even mentioning political problems. And sometimes they demand that neither Russian politics nor even the name of Vladimir Putin, should be part of the conversation. So it just probably makes Putin as Voldemort, he who must not be named. And of course, I feel a little bit like Harry Potter. Talking about Russia today, so I always want to warn journalists or experts or just bypassers who are discussing the situation in Russia, not to use words like politics, elections, campaign, because it always misleads the audience. People assume that Russia is some kind of democracy with some kind of elections. And in real life, the typical Russian polling station today looks like that. Yeah. And in order to carry this kind of political system, any regime needs to secure the media, the waves, the printed media, because people should be brainwashed, and no information about the wrongdoings of the government should be allowed to be spread around for the masses. And without access to media, setting aside the internet, there were very few options left but just to fill the streets and to express our protest. And one of the things we accomplished in Russia, and I'm very proud of being part of that, is that all kinds of opposition in Russia, the radical left, the nationalists, the liberals, of course, we all are now sticking with the non-violent resistance, which is vital for the future of our country, because Russia has exceeded all limits of violence, probably for the next several hundred years. And the only violence we could see in the streets, it comes from the regime. And no matter how many people are on the streets, they always have the same response. It's a brute force, dispersing the crowd, beating people, arresting people, and sending the message that being in the street is dangerous for your future, for your career, for your job, and maybe for your health, and for some even, just sometimes even for your life. So that's it's some pictures from mass demonstration a few years ago, but things do not change. It could be 2007, 2008, 2009, 2011. As long as Mr. Putin stays in power, things will not change, or they could only change for worse. For every speech I deliver, I always look at Wikipedia for the day in history. I think it's very important, you know. I can proudly say never delivered the same speech twice, but then history also brings you to, to the uniqueness of the situation, because certain things happen on May 1st, or May 2nd, May 3rd. Of course, today is May 1st, Labor Day. But there is also one anniversary that is probably also overlooked. It's 50 years ago, Fidel Castro proclaimed, May 1st, 1961, proclaimed Cuba a socialist nation and abolished the elections. Well, at least he was honest. Because, as we know, today all these regimes, they go for some kind of elections. They want to pretend to be democratic. But it's quite important to remember, you know, that's we have a bunch of orthodox totalitarian regimes that still exist on the world map. So it's Cuba, North Korea, yeah, and they have a great ability of surviving. So hopefully not for long. Going back to my country, so definitely press is #1 target for Putin's regime after they had a cleansing operation to eliminate any political opposition. Yeah, and today when we complain and when we are shouting, very often we hear the voices from the West, from this country or from the Europe, saying, look, maybe it's not a democracy, but you're definitely better off that 70 years ago or even 30 years ago. Thanks for the comparison, yes. Yeah. We definitely feel a bit safer than under Stalin and even probably under Brezhnev, but it's a long comparison, because between 1937 and 1985 and 2011, we also had 1991. 20 years ago, the communism was overthrown in Russia, and there was a huge celebration. Nobody probably could believe in the August of 1991 that less than 10 years after this festive mood, we'll be having KGB Lieutenant Colonel coming back. And in the 90s, Russia was a chaotic place. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that it was a perfect democracy under Boris Yeltsin. But it was weak, but fertile ground for the future. It could serve as a foundation for future democracy. Unfortunately, it's all done. And we all hope that we can, not coming back, but we can start again. We can have a second chance. And it will all, of course, depends entirely on us. But the journalists who are promoting the truth, who are trying to stay on top of the stories, they are not safe in Russia. Russia, among many sad records made under Vladimir Putin, has one of the worst records in number of journalists being killed. And just this is one of the lists, of course, on top, just from that side. You have Anna Politkovskaya. She was killed in 2006, and I was also in New York, actually. It was a festival, New Yorker festival. I was at stage with David Remnick when we got the news that she was murdered. And it was October 7th. And Russia is quite a symbolic country, and that's Vladimir Putin's birthday. So I always say that the future of my country depends very much on this date. If either we celebrate Vladimir Putin's birthday or we mourn Anna Politkovskaya. And that will be the face of our country. Of course, I hope for latter. And the other names, it's Oleg Kashin, beaten badly, and no investigation ended with no results. Natalia Estemirova killed in Grozny, and Ramzan Kadyrov is Putin's strongman in Chechnya, cynically said many times that she was not a human rights defender and she was just spoiling peace and order in Chechnya. And Mikhail Beketov was defending the forest in the Moscow countryside, and he's still in technical coma, beaten very, very badly. And we all know that this forest has been ruined because some of the very close Putin associates got their investment in building another road from Moscow to St. Petersburg. But there are not only journalists. Obviously, Kremlin cares about written word in general. And again, in Russia, books and the written word was also always very, very important. And I just wanted to first mention my favorite book, Mikhail Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, The Master and Margarita. It's an amazing book, one of the probably most sophisticated books written in Russia in the 20th century. It's a unique combination of different genres. It's very subtle and subversive. And it's there are many, many quotes from the book. Probably it's the most quoted book in Russian literature. But one of them is very important, is the manuscripts do not burn. The irony is that Bulgakov at first stage burned the manuscript, worrying about consequences for him and his family if it's discovered. But the manuscripts do not burn, and the book was actually printed 30 years after his death with many cuts. And the full version, I think, just was published only at the end of Perestroika. But just still, the book tells about okay, probably you all know that's about devil visiting Russia, but it just gives great characters and also presents a lot of the national spirit and suppressive power of totalitarian ideology, and talks about, of course, human characters and flaws in this character. But the modern literature is also about the Kremlin, and here we have one of the most prominent Russian modern writers, Vladmir Sorokin. And in 2002, his book, Blue Art, was under attack of what we then in Russia call Putin Jugend. It just was the beginning, the dawn of this brainless organization. And of course, in the best tradition of Putin Jugend, they attacked the written word, because that always represents a threat to the dictators. And that's them marching there. You can see them. They all look alike. They haven't changed much. And by the way, recently we discovered that one of the new clones of this early organization, because there are many of these clones now spread around Russia, they just had the number of, like a set of rules for a young fighter. And somebody looked, at this text and discovered that it was much better written in the original German. No, they just simply, took the entire piece of Goebbels propaganda and just translated it in Russian. And this is one of the recent books, actually, 2006. It's translated now, Day of the Oprichnik. And I think it's an amazing book. It's a great piece of literature, and it just talks about Russia, and It's something that we probably may call sort of the black fantasy or political fantasy, something that tells you about Russia in the future as a mixture of medieval cruel regime empowered by modern technologies. But the tragedy is, the real tragedy is that many of the elements of this book have been gradually materializing under Vladimir Putin. And sometimes it's very difficult to set aside the real life and Vladimir's predictions. I think he's not very happy that he played the role of the prophet. And the name Oprichnik, again, it's just, I don't know whether it requires translation. So it's the special guard of a Tsar with unlimited powers. They serve the crown. They are not limited by any laws. And they benefit from what they do. So they go after the enemies of the state, enemies of the crown, enemies of Holy Church. But at the end of the day, they receive direct profit from carrying these ruthless policies. And today, we have a very similar situation. For instance, Yukos, Mikhail Khodorkovsky and his colleagues, behind bars, they jailed. The company confiscated, and it's in hands of the modern Oprichniks, Putin's buddies. They are in charge of the once most successful Russian company. Sergei Magnitsky is another name that is now well known, killed in jail because he was trying to open up the case of corruption, where nearly $250 million was stolen, not by the top Russian officials, but by very sort of mid-level police officers, tax police officers, and district attorney, or I think even deputy district attorney. All information is available, nothing happens. Just to understand, the size of the corruption in Russia today, because in Russia, corruption is no longer a problem. In Russia, corruption is a system. I give you just one number, not from myself, not from my colleagues, not from CIA. It comes from Dmitry Medvedev himself. The amount of money stolen in the process of state purchases in Russia, it exceeds $35 billion. It's just an official number given by Medvedev. We all understand it's a sort of a tip of the iceberg. But just gives you an idea how much money is being taken by modern Oprichniks. And not that these guys are they're shy about what they're doing. To the contrary, they're proud. They believe they're doing something great for the country, and they believe they deserve to become billionaires, because under Vladimir Putin, Russia jumped at the second spot in the world as number of billionaires in the country, just behind the United States, way ahead of Japan and Germany. And the combined amount of money owned by these people, it's almost twice as much as the Russian annual budget. And again, it's not even kept in secret. They believe that as those who protect the interest of the country, the way they understand it, they deserve to benefit. And one of Putin's closest friends, who was serving as the former first deputy of KGB under Vladimir Putin, and then had a number of top positions, Viktor Cherkesov, he was very open about it, and that's probably, maybe he read the book, because what he said, it very much reflects the time of Ivan the Terrible. The country was saved by hanging on the Chekist hook. Chekist, it's Cheka, it's the original name of KGB. That's they started. It's Cheka, NKVD, KGB, now FSB. The acronyms can change. The nature is still the same. Oprichniks. Ivan the Terrible, cruelty, hanging on the hook, on the Chekist hook. And that's him. He was proudly saying it for Russian press in 2008. By the way, after he said it, he lost his job. Well, so, and we understand why, because you are not supposed to disclose the obvious. The power in Russia should be sacred, and Vladimir Putin, is trying to keep it together and just to make sure that they are not mixed with average man on the street. But I think it's a great confession. So Vladimir Putin will stay in power as long as we allow him to stay. There's no doubt that any noises about liberalization, any hopes that may come from Russia, or any hopes about positive changes here in America, in Washington, or in Europe, they are unfounded. Putin has nowhere to go, and that's the destiny of every dictator. You could be mega rich, but when Putin calls himself a slave at the galley, I think it's, the Freud should be very pleased, because it just tells us that he recognized that even with a golden chain, but he's chained to the position of power. The moment he goes, everything collapses. The entire empire falls apart. And at one point, we thought in Russia that we could expect some kind of orange revolution, as it was in Serbia, as it was in Ukraine, or in Georgia, not the state of Georgia, Republic of Georgia, as was mentioned at early stage of this speech. But it's all in vain. Vladimir Putin's regime eliminated every opportunity for this peaceful transition, because Orange Revolution was always a result of the falsified elections, but the opposition had faction in the parliament, opposition has access to television, some access to television. Opposition had some nationwide figures, and people knew that the regime was not ready to play Gaddafi. With Vladimir Putin, things would be different, because Orange Revolution is no longer possible in Russia, and then we know from history that it will end up with people eventually filling the streets in the numbers that will be impossible to handle by the regime. And we could see the power of people versus people in power in the Arab world. So not the place where we expected to get such lessons. But it was all empowered by new technologies, by Facebook and Twitter. But I think we should look at this picture as we should look at the big picture. I believe that in the history of human race, we had three milestones of distributing information: the creation of alphabet, and it led to the creation of the state, and then the book printing. The book printing actually changed the balance of power in medieval Europe, and led to Renaissance, and brought thousands and thousands of people into this circle of decision making. It helped the crowds to overthrow the powers of existing monarchies and the grip on power of the Catholic Church. And today we have internet which gives a lot of power to individuals. And now we are talking about millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of people participating in decision making. So making even little decisions, but as we saw in Egypt, in this Tahrir Square, as we saw in other Arab countries, as we're seeing in the world now, this little extras, adding one by one and multiplied by millions, create a very different environment. And at the end of the day, it's not about technologies. It's not about the special tricks that you can play with internet, Facebook or Twitter. it's about human qualities. It's about us being educated. It's about us spreading the word. It's about us reading the right books and also writing the right books. And it's about us not losing our courage, because for whatever we believe, we should be ready to fight. And it's still the same as 500 years ago or so. And I think that modern technologies make this task more difficult. And on the other hand, it's a bit easier, but it's still about human qualities rather than about technology. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much for that. Can you hear me all right? Okay. So, I don't think there's any reason to delay. Let's just get right to it. I'd like to ask a few questions of my own first. I'm very honored to be moderating such a distinguished panel, and I would like to get a few of my own things off my chest. And once we've done that, then I would like to open it up to questions from the floor, if that's possible, because it would be very interesting to see what's on your minds as well. So I guess my first question is to Garry, although I would like to hear others weigh in on this afterwards as well. Sort of building on what you said, I would describe the present-day system in Russia as a kind of extraordinary fusion of authoritarian government and organized crime. I hope that's not too controversial. We can fight about it afterwards. And this is a very complicated system that allows for a lot of personal freedoms, for example, that didn't exist in the Soviet Union. And yet it also reacts very viciously to any sort of impetus for change or reform. It's sort of a very mixed bag. And I was wondering, how does one affect change under a system like this? It's not an easy task. How should people go about it?
Yeah, you're right. It's a fusion. It's a unique fusion of different factors. You could see some elements of the feudal society, as we saw it in just a few moments ago. There are elements of the Mussolini corporate state also there. But I think overall it's more of the mafia-like ruling based on the loyalty. Loyalty is a key. So as long as you're loyal to your sovereign, you are okay. You should not break up Omerta rule. As for criminality, yes, every totalitarian regime has its criminal core because it violates the rules, and it doesn't respect any rights of human being, often even their rights to live. Putin's regime is different because it's unlike Stalin or Hitler or Mao or the classical dictators. It's not just about power. It's not power for power. It's more for power for money. I used to say that Putin's dream is to rule like Stalin and to live like Abramovich. With emphasis on oligarch, because they want this luxury, and actually that's well described in Day of the Preaching. Right. So luxury is vital. Palaces, the planes and the property everywhere. So, and the trick is that they're not using tanks as Hitler. They're using banks, and it's far more difficult to actually identify because their influence has been growing steadily. And now they have even top European politicians serving for Putin, like Gerhard Schröder from Germany, or Lipponen, ex-prime minister of Finland, and Berlusconi is Putin's business partner, and you can go on with this list. So it's a system that can hide behind fake democratic institutions, and Putin believes that being part of this environment makes him immune from the critics. And actually he was right. I mean, let's give credit when credit is due, So it's hard to attack Putin as somebody who ruined democracy in Russia when He presides over a meeting in St. Petersburg with Bush, Blair, Berlusconi, Chirac. So for average Russian, it seems like, you know, he is a part of this exclusive democratic club. So it's a system that does not have an exact spot on the history timeline. And that's what makes it more difficult for us to confront it.
Vladimir, maybe?
Я готов подписаться под каждым словом Гарри Каспарова. Собственно, он поставил, по-моему, оптимальный диагноз современной России.
I'm ready to sign up for and agree with everything that Garry Kasparov has said. He has made a very accurate diagnosis of the situation in Russia.
Но у меня есть один вопрос к нему. Собственно, вот мы говорим об этой ситуации, так сказать, в России сейчас. В общем, она как бы, ну, наверное, уложится в понятие стагнации, да?
But I do have a question for him. We're talking about the situation in Russia, and what it comes down to basically is stagnation.
Да. И, собственно, эти периоды стагнации в России и во времена монархического режима и, так сказать, в советские, они были довольно затяжными.
Now, these periods of stagnation that have occurred at various times in Russian history, both under monarchies and in the Soviet era, have been generally rather protracted.
То есть это как бы, ну, это в политике, в журналистике это называется политическая зима, да? Вот когда наш медведь, который вот здесь был изображен, он спит в своей берлоге, собственно, и этот сон продолжается долго.
And journalists like to refer to this as a political winter, when the bear, and we saw a picture of him earlier, is hibernating in his den for a rather long time.
Потом этот мишка просыпается и начинает яростно как бы ворочаться и чесаться, собственно, да, и вот здесь происходят некие необратимые события, называемые революция, перестройка, ну, или, ну, так сказать, или это бывают войны, естественно.
So then the bear, who might be called Misha, starts to wake up, he stretches, he starts to scratch himself, he gets a bit restless after his long slumber, and then certain irreversible events start to unfold. It could be revolution, it could be perestroika, or it could be wars.
Вот не кажется ли вам, что все как бы, ну, будем говорить, все перемены в России всегда происходили вынужденно, да? Вот вынужденно рухнула империя Романовых, вынужденно во многом рухнул Советский Союз, ну и вынужденно произошла и, так сказать, Октябрьская революция, будем говорить, и перестройка. Ну, то есть верите ли вы в то, что произойдет произойдут какие-то события в России не вынужденно, а осознанно, ну, можно сказать, впервые в ее истории.
Doesn't it seem to you that all change in Russia has occurred either forcibly or because it had to happen? The collapse of the Romanov dynasty, the revolution of 1917, perestroika, the collapse of the Soviet Union, that it only happened because it was unavoidable and it had to happen. Do you believe that there could be events in Russia which happen not this way, but in a more conscious way because there's a decision taken, or that's because the society works it out that way? If so, it would be the first time in Russian history that events unfold in such a manner.
I can't help thinking that this question, reminds me of one line from the Master of Margarita, when Pontius Pilate is asking God, what's reassured? Do you believe that the kingdom of truth will be eventually built? I think that events today, if we compare Russia in 2011 with 1989, 1917, or 1861, it's all unfolding with a much faster pace. So history doesn't offer any country, whether Russia or another one, time to consider and to sleep forever. So it's a simple choice. Either country dies under Putin's spell or it recovers. So I still have certain historic optimism because I believe the trend had changed now, and this is what's happening now in the Arab world could probably lead to some positive changes in Russia. Because a lot of people, they just recognize that the regime is no longer offering any hope for the future. When Putin took over in the year 2000, oil was $20 a barrel, and Russian economy was doing fine. We had there was a profit in the budget, and the economy was growing about 10%. Today, oil is nearly $120 a barrel, and Russian economy is sinking, and the budget is in the red. So a lot of people just recognize that the model is not working. It's we also call this the Putin system is a bizarre combination of Karl Marx and Adam Smith, with all expenses nationalized and profits privatized. But this system cannot last forever. And I feel that there is this growing anger, or at least anxiety, of millions of Russians who do recognize that the regime brought our country to the dead end. The problem is that people in Russia, they want to see an alternative. And this Vladmir's question is right to the point, because people in Russia today, they are concerned about change. Change they experienced 20 years ago was not exactly what they expected. And they are no longer supporting the regime, but it's like the last resort for self-defense. So we don't like Putin, we don't like this regime, it's not good, but we don't see yet an alternative. So it's up to us to create an alternative. When it's created, when people trust those who could offer this alternative, I think things can change overnight.
Well, let me ask a question about that, and I would love to hear you address this, and I would also like to hear Fedor will weigh in on this one. You mentioned in your presentation the chaos of the 1990s, and that chaos of the 1990s, rightly or wrongly, discredited democracy, democratic activism in the eyes of a lot of Russians. How does the liberal opposition, which I would dare to say you also represent, how would the liberal opposition effectively provide an alternative of the kind you're talking about? And in particular, how do you guys get your act together and stop fighting among yourselves and unify to provide some genuinely credible opposition?
Yes, but you should be very cautious in using words liberal and opposition in Russia. Because many of these words, as you correctly stated, were discredited in the 90s. And there's some kind of this chaos also in the minds of ordinary Soviets, Russians. Because when we had hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Moscow or St. Petersburg and Leningrad at the end of the 80s or in 1990, 1991, people wanted, I mean, it was a very simple menu, you know, they didn't want Soviet regime to continue, they knew communism was bankrupt, they wanted democracy. But democracy for them was just a word. It was just a shell, and they didn't know what's inside. But one thing they knew for sure, the reason they didn't want communists to continue because it was already, it was not bringing any positive news in their daily life. So no goods in the stores, you know, food problems. While in the West, as they heard, many of these people heard, things were different. So there was the combination, or just it's a correlation in the minds of ordinary Soviet citizens of democracy and higher living standards.
Yes.
So, and that's actually played a trick with democracy and democratic institutions in Russia. Because for, you know, 1991, 92, they could tolerate the hardship, economic hardship, year or two. But at one point, they just recognized that it was not about their living standards, it's about new Russians, new rich, getting even richer, while ordinary people, they got almost nothing.
Sure.
So they didn't see democracy as they expected. Now, the sad irony is that under Putin, thanks to these high oil prices, they saw the rising living standards. And many of them believed that that was a democracy. Also, people who were
managed
whatever, managed democracy, sovereign democracy, you know, you can just have many adjectives added to democracy, which definitely ruins the word. And people who actually did this work in the 90s, you know, Gaidar, Chubais, they now clearly associated with this chaos. By the way, in my view, correctly associated, because so-called liberal reforms in Russia were never aimed at building market economy and free political system. It was all about nomenclatura, or Russian all-powerful bureaucracy, being in charge. Then only in charge of finances and property. But eventually, this control of economy had to be translated into the full control of political system.
Yeah. Fedor, what do you think? Liberal opposition to Russia, can there be such a thing?
Ну, я согласен с тем, что сказал Гарри в большинстве сказанного, потому что, безусловно, проблема в том, что демократия и как бы экономические какие-то вещи, это действительно на самом деле две разные вещи, их можно по-разному соединять. И, собственно, проблемы нынешнего режима и, кстати, оппозиции тоже. Потому что режим, на мой взгляд, вообще даже не очень-то думает всерьез и о власти, не очень ценит эту власть. Потому что они совершают поступки, которые указывают нам на то, что они не видят будущего своего. Они не готовят свое будущее.
Well, I agree with most of what Garry said. The problem is that democracy and economic issues are two different things, and they can be combined in different ways. And the regime does not really value its power, and that's clear from the things that it doesn't see a future for itself.
И в этом наступает сложность для оппозиции, мне кажется, потому что с этими людьми, находящимися у власти, можно сколько угодно спорить, но поскольку они сами толком не знают, что делать, ну, кроме, конечно, того, что они себе удовольствие доставляют и деньги приобретают, у них нет никаких целей, никаких других желаний, вообще ничего нет. Поэтому конструктивный разговор невозможен на самом деле. И вот
and this creates difficulties for the opposition, because it's not really possible to argue with the authorities because they don't know what they're doing. All they're interested in is amassing money and luxury and living a pleasurable life, and they don't have any goals.
И поскольку у людей, находящихся у власти, нет никаких гражданских целей, то любой гражданский протест и какая-то гражданская дискуссия для них это просто вредительство. Им кажется это странным, диким. Поэтому, собственно, вот всех нас и записывают постоянно во враги.
And since the authorities have no goals for society, no civic goals, any kind of civic discussion or protest makes no sense to them. They see it as sabotage, they see it as bizarre, and that's why they consider us all to be enemies.
Но это вселяет в нас надежду, мне кажется, потому что поскольку у них нет никаких планов на будущее, видимо, они намереваются скоро либо уехать, либо исчезнуть.
But this is also a source of hope for us because since they clearly have no plans for the future, that must mean that they are either going to disappear soon or go away.
Very interesting. Well, I'd like to take that and transform it into, take that sort of more directly into the world of culture instead of just politics. And this is a question for both Vladimir and Fyodor. It used to be in the Soviet Union, we had Glavlit, we had a centralized agency that did all the censorship. And as far as I know, nothing like that exists in Russia today. It's a much more complicated situation, and you, Vladimir, have suffered a great deal of harassment and intimidation from Putin's youth organizations, and yet a lot of this harassment and intimidation sometimes comes from, it would seem, places that don't necessarily even have a connection with the state. So what's it like today in Russia for someone who's writing and trying to get a message across? How is it today?
Ну, мы сегодня, собственно, здесь обсуждаем современную Россию, и как бы образ, довольно мрачноватый, и вызывает много вопросов. Но есть, безусловно, и, будем говорить, светлые стороны в, нашей жизни.
Well, in Russia today, the picture is kind of grim. It raises a lot of questions, but there are definitely bright sides to the situation.
Вот, это, собственно, можно сказать, что впервые за историю существования России в ней отсутствует литературная официальная государственная цензура.
For the very first time in Russian history, there is no official state censorship.
То есть, если бы сейчас жил любимый Гарри Михаил Булгаков, он бы легко напечатал «Мастер и Маргарита».
Which is to say that if the author that Garry is so fond of, Mikhail Bulgakov, were with us today, The Master and Margarita would be published in an instant, no problem.
То есть пока, я всегда говорю пока, в России писатель может написать, что хочет, и, издатель это напечатает. Ну, безусловно, могут быть последствия, но, собственно, пока они более-менее в, рамках закона. Ну, то есть на людей подают в суд, это, собственно, бывает, да? Но никто не диктует писателю, что ему писать, собственно, и я думаю, что сейчас трудно представить писателя, который пишет в стол, как в советское время.
For the time being, and I always say, for the time being, Russian writers can write what they want, and the publishers will publish it. Of course, there may be consequences, but for the time being, those consequences are within some kind of organized legal framework. People do get sued, that does happen. But no one dictates to writers what they should write, and I think that no one dictates to a writer what they should write.
Да. И, собственно, это завоевание вот со времен перестройки, собственно, и со времен вот того естественного развала Советского Союза. Жесткая цензура распространяется на телевидение и на так сказать, и на некоторые масс-медийные, собственно, издания. Писатель, к счастью, свободен.
This lack of censorship is a gain of perestroika and was a result of the natural collapse of the USSR. Harsh censorship affects television and some mass media. And there was a question from the front row, was Politkovskaya a writer?
Да, конечно, была, и она печатала свои книги.
Of course she was. She published her books.
Собственно, никто не изымал ее книг из типографии, да?
No one came to the print house and took her books away, did they?
Другое дело, что, так сказать, последствия печатного слова могут быть очень тяжелые, собственно, как вот сегодня говорил Гарри.
The fact that the consequence of publishing can be very, very severe is another matter that's been talked about already today.
Но это уже совсем другая, как бы...
Форма цензуры.
Да. Это уже, собственно, совсем другое дело, как там и, там...
But that's a completely different matter.
So, Fedor, what would you say to this?
Я абсолютно согласен, что писать можно что угодно, и все это можно издать. И связано это во многом с тем, что, мне кажется, люди, которые сейчас управляют страной, они, в основном книг особенно не читают, поэтому им неинтересно, они этой областью не интересуются.
And I agree absolutely that now writers can write whatever they want and publish, and this is due in large part to the fact that the people who run the country really barely read it all. It's not an aspect that interests them.
Я бы добавил, что мы, я бы сказал, что это вот первое правительство, собственно, в России, в голове у которого не буквы, а цифры, собственно.
I would add that this is the first government we've had in Russia whose whose leader has in his head not letters but numbers.
И это, собственно, их метафизическое отличие от, ну там, например, от Горбачева, от Ельцина и даже от Брежнева, собственно.
And this is the essential metaphysical difference between the leaders today and Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and back to Brezhnev.
Ну, конечно, как бы способы давления, ну, особенно на прессу, да, на медиа, они существуют. И есть случаи, когда некие неофициальные представители государственных структур через инвесторов, СМИ, через издателей, там, они могут давить действительно на процесс и что-то не пускать. Такое случается.
But of course there are methods for exerting pressure on the media. Those measures do exist, and you see them exerted through unofficial representatives of the government and through people who invest in the media and in publishing houses.
Я сейчас работаю в издательстве, и как раз произошел такой случай. С одной государственной организацией мы заключили контракт на выпуск книги, то есть они платили нам деньги.
I work now for a publisher, and we had a situation recently where the following happened. We signed a contract with a government organization, and they paid us to publish some books.
Но перед тем, как отдать нам эту книгу, они ее не прочли, по-английски книга была.
The book was in English, and before they transmitted it to us, they didn't read it.
А когда они прочли перевод, они подумали, что мы над ними издеваемся и что-то от себя дописали.
When they read it in Russian translation, they thought that we were making a mockery of them, that we were having a good time with them, and that we had added things.
В результате они, ну, по крайней мере, до сих пор не заплатили нам все деньги, которые полагаются.
And the upshot is that they haven't yet paid us the money that we're owed.
И они надавили на нашего инвестора, это иностранный капиталист, сказал, ему позвонил какой-то человек из администрации президента и сказал, что если книга не будет уничтожена, то у него будут проблемы с бизнесом.
And there was pressure on the investor, who's a foreign capitalist. There was a phone call from the president's office that if the print run was not destroyed, the investor would have trouble with his business.
Единственное, что я не понял в этой ситуации, почему они просто не приехали, не забрали тираж книги, заплатили деньги и делали бы с ней все, что угодно.
What I don't understand in this entire story is, why didn't they just come to the publisher, take away the entire print run, pay us, and then just do whatever they want with the books?
Yeah, that's I think, a very interesting story. Now, I can hear that some of you have questions you very urgently want to ask. Before we get to that, I'd just like to ask Jamey Gambrell a quick question. Jamey, you're someone who knows the situation, the cultural situation in Russia extremely well, and yet you're also someone, by virtue of your status as a translator, who's a little bit outside and presumably has a good view of what's going on. Do you see this present moment in Russian literature as a good moment? Are there a lot of interesting things happening in Russian literature, or should we also be speaking of a time of stagnation in culture as well as in politics?
Well, no, I don't think it's a time of stagnation in culture. I mean, you might not everybody likes, one thing or another, but there's such a plethora of things going on. Oops, this isn't working.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, now I may be speaking twice or something. But no, I think it's a very busy time. I don't know that what's being produced is necessarily going to last very long in terms of, how everyone talks about right after the revolution there was this incredible flowering of Russian culture and Russian art and so on. And that's seen usually in a Western narrative as being a result of the revolution. And of course, there was some relationship between the two. Now, I would say that, as people can be, if they're writing fiction, for instance, can be published, and anything they want basically can be published. They can pretty much paint anything they want or whatnot. But again, there are limits. Like a number of years ago, there was a really rather bad exhibition, art exhibition put on called caution or careful religion, caution religion, and it wasn't really of any artistic note or merit. But it was visited, it was about the same time as this happened to Sorokin, it was visited by a similar group of the Putin Jugend, and the exhibition was torn apart, the works were broken up and so on, and there was sort of a bunch of skinheads who did this, but who was arrested? It was the artists who were arrested and the curator of the exhibition, and it was a very scary time for them. There was, a case brought against them. But it's not even just the fact that they touched on the sacred subject of the Orthodox Church, even if they did it in a very kind of adolescent manner. The exhibition was held in the Sakharov Center. And the Sakharov Center had recently, before that, received a $1 million grant from Boris Berezovsky. So there are also other reasons why things can happen that may or may not have any relationship to the cultural things themselves. And I would just like to add, and this is not only true of cultural organizations, or not only true of political and civil organizations, but of cultural ones as well, that one of the favorite strategies or the favorite ways of destroying an organization under Putin's regime is, like not to throw people in jail just like that, not to necessarily beat them up, but that happens too, but to just send the tax inspectors in. And this has happened from Khodorkovsky and Yukos to an organization called Internews, which of course had the problem that it worked with journalists, particularly in the provinces and television stations and radio stations, which are considered to be the sole province of the regime. They got audited and audited and audited. Their computers would be taken away and brought back. Their books would be gone over 20 times. And eventually, because all their accounts were frozen, that was it. That was the end of Internews, which had done a lot of excellent work, and the head of Internews was no longer, she had to leave the country, basically. And this has also happened with civil rights activists, such as Memorial. They've had, I don't know how many audits, and this can happen with just about any kind of group.
Right. I think that is a very characteristic phenomenon. Now let's have some questions from the audience. We have a mic, yes? This gentleman in the front row.
Yes. Thank you, Peter Molnar from the Central European University, Budapest. And The Economist published a piece some months ago, the title of which was The Putinization of Hungary. And my question is that to what extent you think in all post-communist countries tradition, bad parts of the tradition, so the weak traditions of democracy, determine the fate of all countries? So in other words, to what extent we are free to reshape the tradition or depart from the tradition and create free society, even if the tradition of the country does not necessarily support it, and to what extent things like decisions of the European Court of Human Rights can help, as the court in Strasbourg is creating a growing line of decision in which it says that the Russian courts are violating Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights in some censorship cases.
So, so the first question is about the extent to which we have freedom of political action when we might be overburdened by bad national, some kinds of negative national traditions, right? Yes. And your second question was about the human rights court.
So that to what extent European organizations like the European Court of Human Rights of the Council of Europe can help to push the courts and the government as a whole to respect freedom of expression.
Right. And so and then the second question is about the extent to which European institutions, human rights institutions can have an effect on the political and especially the legal system inside Russia, right? Okay, so Garry, is that one you'd like to try?
No doubt that political traditions, historical traditions, they play a certain role, and it's very difficult to overcome just with one push. It takes time, but as far as I'm aware, most of the Eastern European countries that were occupied by Soviet troops, they've recovered at least because they can see the change of the government. The government changed. So people vote, and this vote is decisive. It just recently happened in Hungary, it happened a number of times in Poland, it happened in Czech and Republic and in Slovakia. Yeah, it was, heading south is a bit more difficult, Romania, Bulgaria, but even next to Yugoslavia, it's a reconciliation. So and Slovenia is already, it's a full member of European Union, and just it has probably the same living standards as Austria. So I would not be too skeptical about the future of Eastern Europe because it's almost fully integrated in the European institutions, and I think that they're already way above the problems they experienced in the Soviet past. Now, as for the influence of the European institutions toward Russia, I think it's highly limited because European institutions, they do not exist in a vacuum. These institutions are formed by national governments. And if the national governments are ready to sell human rights for benefits of their corporations and for their short-term political benefits, so how can you expect the European Parliament to make a decision if for British government the interest of British petroleum is way above any other problems in relations with Russia? Or we have the second largest party in Germany still being influenced by Gerhard Schröder's supporters. So it's still, and the Prime Minister of Italy openly boasting his business relations with Vladimir Putin. So in my view, while the European institutions play a very important role, for instance, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, that unfortunately has the record number of cases from Russia, and very often rules against Russia, and by the way, the number of political cases. For instance, I still represent some of the Russian political activists and two political parties from the 2003 elections. Just now they are gradually, investigating the case, and it might be a decision by the end of this year. Okay. So, but and there are more cases there, and some of them they ruled against the state, Russian state, but it has very limited influence because at the end of the day, Putin can afford to pay any fine, €1 million, €10 million, and of course it doesn't go that high, with literally no consequences on Russian political system and Putin's grip in power.
Vladimir, just to follow up on this question, do you think that Western human rights organizations in general can affect the situation inside Russia in some positive way?
Наверное, мне трудно ответить на этот вопрос, потому что, понимаете, вот мы сейчас говорим об этом, да, так сказать, об этих организациях, а я представляю вот всю огромную Россию, да, и как бы вот эти вот песчинки, да, на, так сказать, ее как бы громадном теле вот этого, так сказать, русского медведя, это как, как бы, это микроскопические существа такие совершенно. Я думаю, что, безусловно, сознание народа, который ну, прошел через, так сказать, 20 век, это, ну, то есть это была антропологическая и этическая катастрофа, собственно, для, так сказать, для России. И чтобы мозги населения пришли в нормальное состояние, нужен долгий терапевтический процесс, собственно, и в нем должны участвовать, я думаю, что все силы здоровые, так сказать, и западные, и те, которые есть у нас. Ну.
Well, it's hard for me to answer this question because I'm sitting here, I'm imagining the vast expanse of the entire country of Russia and those little tiny grains of sand, the Western organizations, on this enormous body of the Russian bear, and they're like microscopic creatures. Definitely the awareness of people who have lived through the human and ethical disaster that is the 20th century in Russia, to bring the brains and minds of the public who have lived through that to a normal state will require a long, long therapeutic process in which all healthy forces should participate, Western as well as domestic.
So, another question from the audience? Yes, this gentleman here, please.
Thank you. Despite my feeling, I feel like John Stossel, and I want to say, give me a break. But instead of making a speech, I have 6 short questions. Excuse me.
6. How about 2? 2.
Okay.
How about the 2 most important ones?
I would like to express my disagreement with Garry when he said, when Putin is gone, the system will collapse. I believe in this system. We have to retranslate the term perestroika. We have to call it reconstruction. It was done like controlled demolition. And system is very strong. It was never weak.
So what's the question now?
The question, don't we feel like opposition plays into hands of this system, just helping it to pretend as democracy exists?
Okay, could everyone hear that? No. So the question is the opposition playing into the hands of the system? Yes? By pretending to uphold some kind of democratic space? Or, and the second question?
Let me choose.
Okay. Okay, well, why don't we think over that one first? Would you? No? No? Well, we had another question, though.
Okay, sorry. But that should be the last question.
Okay, well, all right. Well, I'm sorry. I'm told now that we don't have time for another one.
My question would be, how possible the panel would agree that Russia will be virtually sold to whatever money will be offered from whether China or Arab states. So now I think it's a right position for them to buy controlled packet, as we say, the majority of Russian influence.
Oh, okay. So the second question, I guess, was about outside powers in the Middle East and China buying up important parts of Russia and controlling it from outside? No? Yes. All right, so. Yes, please.
You know, at the beginning of, or just, I lived through 1989, 1990, 1991, and the coup and so on in Russia. And I remember very quickly hearing from everyone I knew almost, no matter where they were mostly on the liberal side of the political spectrum, that, you know, oh, you can't do this, everything's bought up. Everything's arranged, it's bought up, it's all a plot, you know, there's no way you can do anything on your own. And while certainly there's a lot of control, this turned out not to be true. People in the cultural field, people started galleries, they were pretty bad sometimes, they found sponsors. Yes, one person influenced more, then a bank got involved, then, you know, something else. Then a tank was brought in, you know, something. But new spaces were created, and people would stop saying, "Oh, it's all bought up, you know, about that one area." And I mean, how can China and other countries buy up Russia? They can't carve it up and take it back to China with them, you know. And that's what's been happening. I mean, you know, Yukos had a certain area of influence. Well, Putin didn't want them to buy up that area, so they, you know, kicked him out. That kind of back and forth happens, yes, but by not a permanent situation. And of course it will change.
Yeah, every non-democratic regime, of course, you know, has deep roots. But it's often the case, not always, that there is the man on the top who is absolutely vital for the survival of the system. Putin is the spine of the system, no doubt about it. And any time the dictator dies, you know, there are changes. You know, it's just things change because too many things are related to this person. And it's a useless discussion. So, okay, we appreciate criticism from New York about what we're doing in Russia. But at the same time, you know, we saw time and again, and regularly, it's like the repetition, but, you know, trying to dissociate Putin with the regime, you know, it just actually plays into the hands of the regime because Putin is in charge. Whether, you know, the name of the president is Medvedev or whatever, Putin is in charge. And this is, by the way, this is a very, very important thing, you know, it's a proof of the non-democratic nature of Russian state. Because here in America, you know, there's a president, there's a secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the Supreme Court, the governor. So you have institutions, and you know exactly about the functions of these institutions. Whether the name of the president is George W. Bush or Barack Obama, the functions of this position do not change. In Russia, it's all the opposite. So actually the power moves us right below Putin. And it's not only about Putin. If you look at other people, you know, for instance, probably second most influential man in Russia is Igor Sechin. Who is just, you know, if you look at official position, he's almost nobody. But he controls more money than anybody who is much higher, technically much higher in the state hierarchy. Those are, you know, the real indicators of power in Russia. And of course, removing the capo di tutti capi, the boss of bosses, hurts the system. Whether it will ruin it, I don't know. But it will definitely be a change of the status quo. That's why attacking Putin, and that's the decision of Russian opposition, conscious decision of all political groups. Putin must go. This is the best thing we can do, because in Russia many things are, you know, are very personal. You cannot tell people, you know, very complicated stories. They have to know the target. Vladimir Putin must go. This is the way we fight the regime.
Yeah.
And as for Russia, countries buying, I mean, come on, Putin controls more money today than any dictator, Tsar, king, emperor in the history of human race. You simply start counting money Putin can mobilize. And when Vice President Biden was in Moscow and he met a group of Russian opposition leaders, I told him, Vice President, you and Obama are beggars compared to Putin, because you have to go to Congress and ask for $1 million, and you may be turned down. Vladimir Putin can bribe $1 billion without signing a piece of paper. There's $350 billion a budget of Russia. There are $500 billion is a gold and hard currency reserves, and $300 billion of money controlled by the Putin's oligarchs. And this is the money Putin can move one way or another. No one today has the same immense commercial power. But the trick is, this power evaporates the day he loses power in Russia. Yes. And as for China, the last comment. Yes, China is a threat to Russia, but not because of money, but because of demographics.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very simple rule. And I remember when I was in Irkutsk, I heard a joke, local joke, a sad joke, that Chinese are crossing our border in small groups, 100,000 each.
Do we have time for one? I see someone way up there at the back who really wants to ask a question. Can we get a microphone up there? Is it logistically impossible? I'm sorry about that. Really, really wants to ask a question. That'll be a good one. Yeah. Let's get this question.
Is that well? Yeah, I'm interested to hear you say that you need to take politics to the streets. Considering the most active political groups on the streets in Russia at the moment are not liberals like yourself, but people from the far right, I'm wondering whether, when the change that you desire does come, we might not look back on this current period of stagnation with a degree of nostalgia.
Yeah, did everyone hear that? Yeah, the most active groups on the street are actually, says the speaker, the groups of the far right. And maybe, is there a chance that one day we will look back on this present period of stagnation with a certain degree of nostalgia? I think it's a very interesting question. Vladmir, is that one you'd like to tackle? The far right? You've had a little bit of experience with him?
Far right.
It's all the way up there.
Ну, это большая тема на самом деле, и, собственно, вот ностальгии, конечно, вы, так сказать, имели в ностальгию по Советскому Союзу, собственно, и по советской системе, да?
Well, this is a very big topic. When you mentioned nostalgia, were you, of course, referring to nostalgia for the Soviet era?
Нет, он имеет в виду фашистов. Он имеет в виду фашистов. Что будем вспоминать Путина с неизбывной тоской.
Да, да. По сравнению.
Примерно вопрос, если вы перевести.
Значит, я не очень понял вопрос просто. Да, собственно, такие разговоры сейчас идут везде. Я думаю, что их и культивирует, собственно, и путинская команда, безусловно, что вот вы не любите нас, а за спиной нас подпирают такие темные силы, так сказать, от которых у вас просто кровь свернется в жилах, как говорится.
Yeah, there are conversations along those lines, and Putin's camp is implying that, well, you're not happy with us. Well, we are being pressed by such dark forces behind us that if you knew more about them, it would make your blood run cold.
Об этих силах говорить, в общем, можно, но они достаточно, на мой взгляд, ну, будем говорить, у них нет, как бы,
маргинально.
Их никакие элиты не представляют.
Да, собственно, они маргинальны, как бы. И кроме такой вот темной ненависти, собственно, они никаких, ну, никакой разработанной стратегии как бы не несут, так сказать, в себе, и действительно, правильно сказал Федор, что их не представляют никакие элиты. потому что это просто невыгодно, собственно.
Yeah, as far as these dark forces are concerned, they exist, but they're marginal. They don't have a strategy, and as my colleague said quite rightly, there's no elite that represents them because it's not in anybody's interest to do so.
Ну, это такой, как бы, вот, так сказать, образ темных сил, так сказать, которые могут вырваться, как бы, из, так сказать, из глубин национального подсознания, как бы. Он очень удобный для разыгрывания, как бы, этой карты, собственно, да, вот им, ну, им, так сказать, очень удобно пугать людей, собственно. Okay. Что и делается, собственно.
So this is a kind of image of the dark forces which could come bursting out of the depths of the national subconscious. And it's a very convenient trump card which can be played for the purpose of intimidating people, and it is done.
Можно я добавлю? Да. Okay, let's go ahead. Но действительно власть нынешняя пестует и заигрывает с вот разными темными группами, и даже есть, ну, признание со стороны вот каких-то наций, там, что они даже деньги какие-то получали от кого-то. Вот. Но я хочу обратить внимание, да, что несмотря на то, что это маргинальные группы, опасность все равно существует.
The authorities are playing footsie with a variety of various dubious groups, and there are some that claim that they've gotten money from here and there, and they are marginal, but despite that...
Потому что, например, на Кавказе была относительно стабильная республика Ингушетия, и ФСБ стало, как бы, ну, если можно так сказать, создавать впечатление, что там идет террористическая война какая-то.
And an example of that would be in the Caucasus, the Republic of Ingushetia, which was relatively stable, and the Federal Security Service, the FSB, began to, if I can express it this way, create the impression that there was a terrorist war being waged there.
То же самое было в Дагестане.
Same thing in Dagestan, also in the North Caucasus.
И теперь мы имеем террористическую войну в Ингушетии и в Дагестане. Это случилось.
And now, in fact, we do have terrorist war in Ingushetia and Dagestan. It has happened.
И ФСБ больше уже ничего не контролирует. То есть эта игра плохо закончилась. Вот здесь тоже так может быть.
And the FSB is no longer in control of the situation. And this can happen elsewhere too.
So, I'm afraid that we will have to end on that rather dark note. I'd just like to remind you all that...
may I just, I don't like to end up on a dark note.
Okay, fair enough.
No, just, following this, the last question is, as I, working in the United States Front and other Russian opposition organizations, I dealt with different groups. Of course, we don't deal with Nazis, but we have some moderate nationalists and the left-wing radicals. And I said, everybody now is willing, and they show it on the streets, to submit to the nonviolent resistance. But my experience tells me that if we have foreign federations in Russia, there is no threat of these dark forces gaining significant number of seats in the parliament. So it will be very sort of the rainbow parliament with different groups, but they will have to negotiate. So there's no dominant force coming from the depths of from abyss of the national spirit that's threatening every other nation. No, I think it's the FSB has been working hard to infiltrate these groups. They're always trying to play them, to create an illusion that all the alternative to Vladimir Putin are is true is the ultra right wing groups, which is not true.
Point well taken. Thanks.